before we begin, take a deep breath and let the weight of the day gently slide off your shoulders. Tonight, Sleepthrum welcomes you back to a place where stories are told not to excite, but to soothe. Where memory, history, and myth blend softly into dreams. To our returning listeners and to those drifting in for the very first time, Selamat datang, welcome, and bon retour. We're gently waving to our friends listening under the starless skies of Toledo, to the quiet balconies in Chiang Rai, to warm living rooms in Fez, and shared earbuds beneath the covers in Yogyakarta. We see you in Kaunas, in the midnight stillness of Banjarmasin, in the small corners of Tetuan, and to the late-night walks in Ljubljana. From the desert breezes of Windhoek to the cool mountaintops of Shimla. To you who clicked play just to hear something kind before sleep, you're not alone. Wherever you are, however you are, this space is yours. Tonight's story is woven with quiet laughter. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that heals. It is a tale from the warm soil of West Africa, where once the world's kindest medicine came not in bottles, but in the form of jokes told beneath mango trees. So let's settle in, turn down the lights, loosen your thoughts, and listen to the gentle remedy of joy as it once echoed through villages, carried not by thunder, but by laughter. This is how West African healers used laughter as medicine. Part 1. The village that laughed every Thursday. You arrive quietly. That's always how it begins. In the hush before the wind starts turning leaves. In the still breath of dawn just before the market opens. The road that brought you here was long, winding past low hills and thin rivers, dust lifting from the heels of oxen, the sound of footsteps on packed earth. And now you're here, at the edge of a village that seems ordinary. There are goats, clay pots, worn sandals on doorsteps. But what you don't expect, at least not yet, is the sound. Because it hasn't started, not yet. They are waiting, you see. Every Thursday, just after the sun leans slightly westward, when the shadows turn soft and the drums begin their lazy hum, this village does not pray or plant or grind millet. They laugh. It isn't for entertainment. It isn't mockery. And it certainly isn't a joke. It is ritual. A centuries-old inheritance. A medicine passed not by hand, but by breath. The name of this place is not recorded on most maps. But then, neither are its stories. Nestled somewhere between the edge of savanna and the shoulder of the forest, it survives because it remembers. And what it remembers best, more than famine, or colonial schools, or border changes, is laughter. In this village, the elders speak of a time before language became heavy with war, a time when illness was not separated from sorrow, when the mind and the body were not torn apart in diagnosis. Here, they say, healing begins with a smile, not a fleeting grin, not a polite courtesy, but the kind of laughter that bubbles up from your belly and shakes even the silence from its sleep. You're invited to sit beside the fire. An old woman with a crescent moon tattooed on her wrist hands you a calabash of cool water. Her name is Ayo, meaning joy, and she lives up to it. She was the apprentice of the last Adahuns, a word difficult to translate. It means roughly a weaver of joy, a healer of emotional wounds, a performer, a listener, a bringer of balance. Ayo tells you this, slowly, in a voice worn like river stone. My teacher did not own herbs, nor bones. He did not chant spells or grind roots. He told stories that made people cry. Then he told stories that made them laugh. And that, she says, is how they got better. You listen. The crickets are louder now. Someone drums 2 beats in the distance. And Ayo continues. Long ago, before there were borders, when kingdoms were not yet erased, laughter was part of the spiritual diet. Among the Yoruba, there were festivals where mock trials were held. The king himself might be parodied by masked dancers. Among the Sera people, children were taught riddles with no answers, simply to hear the elders chuckle. In Mali, griots used satire as both memory and medicine. Humor was never outside the sacred. It lived there, right beside mourning, as part of a complete emotional life. The Adahuns, the joy weaver, was often mistaken for a fool, dressed in mismatched clothes, singing nonsense rhymes, making flatulent sounds during funerals. But behind the mask was precision, the ability to see what emotion was stuck and how to release it. We don't heal by fixing the body, Ayo says. We heal by loosening what's clenched. You walk now across the village, guided by Ayo's stories. The people here prepare for the Thursday laughter. They sweep their courtyards, but not with urgency. They bring out chairs and drums, but not like an audience. It is more like a circle. No one is performer, no one is patient. All are participants. A man with a voice like honey begins to warm up his jaw with tongue twisters in 5 languages. A girl no older than 10 arranges mango peels into the shape of a snake, her face glowing with mischief. An old uncle, nearly blind, sits with a goat on his lap, telling its secrets. You realize there are no scripts here, no stages, only space. The laughter begins small, a cough that becomes a giggle, a snort that becomes a roar, a child mimicking her grandfather's complaints, a story that spirals into absurdity, and slowly, like rain soaking into dry earth, the mood of the village shifts. Shoulders lower, mouths open. People slap their knees and clutch their stomachs. Some weep from joy. Others you suspect from grief that's finally breaking. Laughter here is not escape. It is confrontation without violence. It is truth without cruelty. It is medicine without bitterness. Ayo sits beside you again. She's not laughing anymore, just smiling. Some sickness comes from loneliness, she says. Others from shame. What laughter does is remind us we are not alone in being ridiculous. The fire crackles. You've forgotten your worries, not because they are gone, but because they are lighter. And for a moment it makes sense. The healer who prescribes laughter may never be respected in textbooks. But perhaps that's because laughter, unlike pills, cannot be bottled. It must be shared. Just then, a boy pretends to be the village goat. He walks on all fours, moves at his own shadow, and then rolls over dramatically. Everyone explodes in another wave of laughter, and you find yourself laughing too. Later, long after the sun has gone, Ayo lights a small candle inside her hut. She shows you a gourd filled with names. Each name belonged to a healer, now gone. We remember them with laughter, she says, so they do not become ghosts who moan, but ancestors who grin. And as the candle flickers lower, You think of your own burdens, of the pain you've carried in silence, of the illnesses no doctor could name. And you wonder, what if the laughter is still medicine? What if somewhere, hidden between data and dosage, there is still room for the healing that comes from simply being able to laugh again? Part 3. The medicine of mirth in the era of trade winds. The warm currents and the waiting shore. You're no longer standing in a quiet village courtyard, shaded by neem trees and echoing with gentle laughter. Instead, you are near the edge of something vast. The air is heavier. The sky feels deeper. Winds bearing salt and whispers have begun to arrive, uncalled for, yet destined. The Atlantic Ocean had long been known to the peoples of West Africa, not as a frontier, but as a breathing thing. It pulsed with tides and trade, with danger and promise. For centuries before the Europeans arrived in ships, the people of the coast and hinterlands already participated in far-reaching trade routes, from the Songhai Empire to the Hausa city-states, from the Yoruba forests to the Sahelian edges. Gold, kola nuts, salt, ivory, and cloth. These flowed like rivers, and yet it was not only goods that moved along these roads. Laughter did too. In marketplaces and among traveling griots, in evening fireside performances and morning rituals in new towns, the laughter-healing traditions of many ethnic groups, Serer, Mande, Wolof, and others, adapted, evolved, and found new echoes. But what happens to healing when the world around it begins to spin too quickly? The arrival of the cowries and the quiet shift in time. The early arrival of cowrie shells as currency, believed to have come through Islamic trade from the Indian Ocean, began to shift values. These small white shells, curved like a permanent smile, were deceptively powerful. A healer in Senegambia might once have been compensated with millet, goats, or communal assistance, but soon their work had to be priced in shells. Where once a healer's joke was priceless, now it had a cost. You see, said one old healer, long after his prime, the problem isn't laughter becoming rare. It's that people forgot how to give it without expecting anything back. In this era, the laughter itself began to mean something new. It was still medicine, but it also became spectacle. Entertainers emerged alongside healers, and though their skills often overlapped, something sacred was quietly being diluted. Rituals on the edge of change. Imagine this. A healer stands before a gathering of elders and strangers in a market town. The year might be 1530, in a Senufo village 2 days' journey from the coast. The people gathered there have seen more travelers than their ancestors ever did. The healer performs a ritual called Jorokaba, meaning to call the breath back. They tell stories of a cunning monkey who fooled a leopard by pretending to be its grandmother. The story makes everyone laugh, but the healer is watching the breath, the rhythm of inhaling, pausing, and laughing. The shifting tension of those who were afraid, now softened. The slow reconnection of broken sleep. But fewer people are watching with reverence. Some have come only for the story, not the medicine. This distinction haunts the healers of this era. The first disruptions, faiths in collision. By the mid-1500s, Islam had already long been present in West Africa. It traveled with traders and scholars, slowly blending with local traditions. Many families had an imam and a healer, both considered necessary. Yet, tensions were forming. Some Islamic reformers regarded the laughter rituals as superstitions, dangerous remnants of an age before written truth. And so, in some places, laughter became secret again, but not everywhere. In places like Timbuktu and Jenne, where scholars debated ethics and medicine in candle-lit rooms, some healers found allies. A few Sufi teachers believed that laughter was a gift of God, a disruption of the ego. They invited healers to their gatherings, not to perform, but to restore what was lost in grief. A laughing Sufi sheikh in Gao once said, "When you laugh, you are not only happy, you are not only amused, you are letting go of time, which is the first disease." This became a secret teaching, passed between circles of healers who dared to keep practicing joy. Laughter in the time of shadows. The Atlantic slave trade began to rise like a distant thundercloud. Its early decades were felt not as war or disaster, but as strange silences. People disappeared. Stories faded. Laughing rituals were postponed, then forgotten in some places. The role of the healer became harder. How do you laugh when your cousin is gone? How do you summon joy when your village is building fences? How do you ask a stranger to exhale their fear when you yourself no longer sleep deeply? And yet, they continued. Healers created new forms of laughter medicine, shorter, quieter, more secret. A game of rhythm clapping in the back of a hut. A whispered joke disguised as a proverb. A ritual where a woman would pretend to be a goat and make everyone fail at keeping a straight face. These were not just distractions. They were acts of spiritual resistance. The woman who laughed into chains. Her name was Janaba, and her story should not be lost. In a coastal village near the Gambia River, she was known as a weaver and a healer of bitter minds. Every dry season, she performed laughter rites for women who had miscarried or lost husbands to war. She would wear a crooked crown made of cow dung and pretend to be a visiting queen of clumsiness. When slavers came to her village, she did not run. She told the women to sit. She told the children to breathe. She began a performance, and she made them laugh, even as they were taken, even as they were chained. The story goes, no one knows how true, that even on the ship, she whispered jokes in a language the guards did not understand. That several children remembered how to laugh in the dark because of her. Laughter, like breath, cannot be stolen, only forgotten. The road between two healers. In this era, two healers lived who never met, one inland, one coastal. Their methods were different, their beliefs barely aligned, yet both used laughter as their medicine. One, a man named Kuyate, performed in mountain villages with wooden masks that told riddles. He was old and never smiled except when his patients laughed. He believed laughter should be earned like rain. The other, a young woman named Tabi, danced while telling stories in markets, mimicking the ridiculous walks of colonial officials. Her laughter came in waves, and she often laughed harder than her audience. She believed laughter should overflow like a broken pot. Both kept journals. Both doubted whether their medicine had a future. Neither is remembered in books. But their laughter still exists somehow, somewhere, in a family tradition, in a bedtime story told in Wolof or Fula, in the way someone chuckles quietly while slicing okra. The open question of part 3. So now here you are, 3 parts into a forgotten lineage. You have walked through villages that once laughed freely, stood beneath the gaze of traders and storm clouds, and heard stories of healing that didn't require herbs or charms. But what will happen next? What happens when a world begins to speak in new languages, to count in new currencies, to cry in different accents? And in all that change, will the medicine of laughter still survive the crossing? Part 4. When the spirits forgot to laugh. You are standing at the threshold of change now. Not the loud kind that marches with banners, but the quiet kind that rearranges the soul of a village without ever raising its voice. It begins not with the absence of sound, but with the absence of echo. The drum beats that once answered the dawn, gone. The children's chorus of riddles in the mango grove, gone. And the most alarming loss, the soft cackle of old women telling stories with their hands over the cooking fires. Somewhere between 1885 and 1905, across many parts of West Africa, the work of laughter healers, the ones who calmed fevers with a tale, who slowed death by shifting the room's mood, began to fade. Not abruptly. It wasn't a collapse. It was a withering, like a smile forgotten mid-conversation. In Yorubaland, among the Nupe, the Wolof, the Mende, and the Songhai, French and British medical officers brought in sanitized instruments and antiseptic logic. They didn't recognize the laughter of women in the corner hut as healing. They saw it as interruption, superstition, noise. And so, they began building silence. Hospitals were erected near colonial compounds. Clinics, they called them, though for many villagers they felt more like caves. Cold, white, too bright. The laughter that once bounced off the woven mud walls of the healers' homes could not find its footing in these places. The healers, for a time, stayed silent, not in protest, but in confusion. The questions came slowly. Why do they not ask for the story before the diagnosis? Why do they never begin with a riddle? Why do they never laugh when we speak? The old ones, those who had learned laughter from mothers, who had learned it from spirits, began forgetting. Not because age took their memories, but because their memories no longer had space to live. A grandmother in Segu told her daughter one morning, "I had a story for your child's cough, but now I'm not sure the story remembers me." The spirits were the first to feel the cold. In the old ways, they had been courted with music and merriment, sometimes even mocked lightly so they'd feel comfortable descending into the room. Now, the rooms had sharp corners, and the people wore stiff coats. The spirits hovered outside, confused. Even the wind changed. Before, when someone laughed near the millet fields, the wind would carry it across the trees and return it as a reply. Now, the wind passed over without pause. No reply, no echo. The spirits forgot how to laugh. Not out of malice, but from being left out of too many conversations. The children were the last to stop laughing freely. At first they whispered jokes behind the missionary school buildings, passed riddles like contraband, and tried to remember how their grandmothers used to begin a tale with a cough and a dramatic stretch. But as uniforms stiffened and bells rang louder, They began to mimic the seriousness they were taught. A boy in Porto Novo once told a laughter healer, "I'm not supposed to giggle during prayers. Father said God does not like noise." The healer didn't answer. She only smiled and looked down at her hands, remembering the days when people believed laughter made the gods lean closer, not further. By 1910, the number of laughter healers had dwindled. Some had taken new names. Others had gone silent entirely, folding their jokes like old robes and placing them at the back of clay cupboards. But in some villages, under some stars, the wind still remembered. And once in a while, a grandmother would lean into a sick child and say, "Let me tell you a story the spirits once laughed at." The child would listen, wide-eyed. And somewhere in the night, an echo would stir again. Part 5. The last joke before silence. There is a story still whispered in the gold dust of Sahel nights about a healer named Makori, the last laughter binder of his village. His hut stood at the edge of a tamarind grove, crooked like a smile that never quite faded. Children once ran there barefoot, trading their fevers for folk tales, their headaches for riddles, their griefs for giggles. But this was near the end, when laughter no longer echoed like it used to. Makori had grown quiet. His voice still worked, but his stories no longer found homes in the hearts of those who visited. The world had changed around him. People now traveled farther, to clinics with tiled floors and iron beds. They were given pills with names longer than his best proverbs. Still, every dusk, he would light a small oil lamp, arrange his calabashes, and wait. One evening a boy came, not sick, just lost. His mother had died that morning, and the house had filled with saltwater silence. He ran until he reached the old grove, drawn by instinct older than language. Makori didn't ask what hurt. He didn't need to. Instead, he asked the boy, "Do you know why the hyena walks with a limp?" The boy shook his head. "Because he tried to dance with a lion's wife in the lion's shoes." There was a long silence. Then, the faintest twitch at the corner of the boy's mouth. Makori smiled, not triumphantly, but gently, as if placing a worn blanket over someone shivering in their sleep. They sat like that for a long while, the healer and the orphan, under a tree that remembered older songs. Makori told no more jokes that night. He only hummed a rhythm that no longer had a name, tapping his fingers on his knee like a forgotten drumbeat. The boy left before sunrise. He would grow up to become a school teacher. He would not tell jokes, but sometimes, when a child cried too long in his classroom, he would tap his fingers on the desk and murmur, "Do you know why the hyena walks with a limp?" Makori died one Harmattan morning, wrapped in a faded kente cloth. No one found him until 3 days later. His hut was untouched, except for one odd thing, a riddle carved into the dirt floor beside him. What is the thing that dies when spoken and lives when laughed at? There was no answer written. Some say it was a final test. Others say it was a farewell. But among the older villagers, those who still remembered how to listen sideways, they said this was Makori's last gift. A joke not meant to be solved, but remembered. After Makori's death, laughter disappeared more swiftly. He had been the last in that region who still believed it to be medicine. There were no apprentices. The traditions, once passed in songs and smirks, were now folded shut in his silence. Yet somewhere, far from where he died, a girl grew up humming a rhythm she had never been taught. And in her dreams, a voice asked gently, "Do you know why the moon never laughs out loud?" She always woke before the punchline. Part 6 echoes in the new clinics. Even laughter can wear a white coat if we let it. You are no longer sitting under the neem tree or crouching beside a circle of healers in the rustling shade. The forest has receded. The drums have faded. In this 6th part of our journey, we arrive at the concrete echo of hospitals, universities, and dusty medical archives in Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and the quiet records of French colonial doctors who never quite knew what they were documenting. And yet, if you close your eyes, the laughter remains. It echoes in spaces they never meant it to. Lecture halls, dispensaries, and psychiatric clinics where tradition meets stethoscope. This is a story about how memory survives in unlikely institutions. It is the tale of laughter that refused to be disarmed. The asylum with 2 doors. In 1913, on the outskirts of Dakar, a colonial psychiatric hospital was constructed. Rows of cemented halls, iron bars, and quiet rooms. In the French reports, it was called L'Hôpital des Aliénés de Dakar. But in the local tongue, among the people, it had another name, Ndaye Ndao Ndao, loosely meaning the place of whispered madness. This hospital was designed to civilize the mind, to cure through silence and segregation. But among its workers, some of whom came from the local Serer or Wolof traditions, there were whispers of an older healing still alive in memory. One orderly, known as Papa Gay, born in Keolac but trained in French sanitation, began holding smiling hours. He never recorded them, but a nurse named Mam Diarra, decades later, remembered them in an oral history project. He made the patients tell jokes, even those who had forgotten their names. They could still tell a joke. These smiling hours happened in secret. Laughter was not in the medical protocol. It was not considered therapeutic. But in Papa Gay's quiet rebellion, it became ritual. The return of the griot. By the 1970s, after independence movements surged and new African governments took shape, traditional medicine was once again invited, though cautiously, into the halls of academic discourse. In Ibadan, Nigeria, a small but radical conference in 1974 brought together biomedical doctors and babalawos, herbalists, spiritualists, and even a griot known only as Alagba Omotade. His presence was controversial. He didn't present a paper. He sang. He told the story of a village that lost its healer, only to discover that his daughter, born without speech, could make people laugh without words. The attendees were confused. The transcript of that conference doesn't even record his full performance. Just one line in brackets. The griot sang. The hall was silent. Some laughed. Some didn't. That was the tension. Laughter even then could not be fully translated into data, but its presence lingered. The case of the silent boy. A case study appears in a 1982 volume of the West African Journal of Mental Health. A boy in Accra, diagnosed with catatonia, unresponsive to verbal stimuli, was sent home after failed treatment. His grandfather, a retired healer, sat with him for 17 days straight. On the 18th day, he brought in a small goat, dressed it in human clothes, and let it loose in the courtyard. The boy laughed. Once, it wasn't a cure, but it was movement. It was something Western-trained doctors could not explain, and the paper ends without conclusion, only stating, "Further inquiry into emotional provocation as therapy may be warranted." They did not say laughter, but we know what they meant. Universities, white coats, and smiling masks. By the late 1990s, several universities in Ghana and Senegal began offering elective courses on traditional medical philosophy. Most students skipped them, but a few stayed. Among the few was Dr. Aissatou Kamara, now a psychiatrist in Freetown. She writes in her memoir, "I grew up watching my aunt laugh people into healing. I didn't believe in it until I saw a woman stop shaking during a joke. Now I teach my residents to never underestimate what joy can do." At the University of Legon, a professor nicknamed Dr. Chuckle, real name Professor Mensa Oforiata, taught a seminar on humor and somatic memory. He believed the body stored grief and that laughter was a somatic exhale. His theories were never widely adopted, but his students still remember him. One former student, now a doctor in Kumasi, told an interviewer, "He taught us that even white coats should carry a grin. Not all medicine comes in tablets. What laughter cannot heal." Of course, not all pain can be laughed away. There were and are limitations. In post-conflict Liberia, in the wards of Sierra Leone after the Ebola crisis, laughter often vanished. It felt like betrayal. It felt like forgetting. But even in those places, laughter crept back. Not loudly, but gently. In a refugee camp in northern Côte d'Ivoire, a child started mimicking the aid workers, waddling with a clipboard, mispronouncing French, making the others giggle. An anthropologist recorded this and asked the boy what he was doing. He said, "I'm making medicine." Modern clinics and ancient echoes. Today, some clinics in West Africa integrate laughter, not as performance, but as invitation. In the Gambia, a rural health center has a joy circle every Friday afternoon. Patients and staff gather not for therapy, but for stories. In Nigeria, mental health workers trained in both Western and Yoruba traditions use ritualized joking relationships to create trust before treatment. Even in high-tech urban hospitals, some practitioners play music in waiting rooms, tell light-hearted stories during intake, or use humor in small, respectful ways. They do not always call it medicine, but it is. The memory of laughter. You sit with this now. The strange truth that something as ordinary, as silly, as fleeting as laughter once carried the weight of healing, and still does, though many of the old healers are gone and their houses swallowed by trees or time, their echoes remain in the way a nurse smiles before taking a pulse, in the child who pretends to be a doctor, wearing a plastic stethoscope and making faces. The forest is far, the clinic is near, and yet the space between them isn't so great. Ending notes. But here we must pause, because the echoes are not always clear. They are interrupted by bureaucracy, by war, by the passage of time. Still, a question remains. If laughter is medicine, why did we ever stop prescribing it? And more importantly, who still remembers the old prescriptions? Part 7, a song without a punchline. By now you may have started to notice something about the stories we've been sharing. Something subtle. Something that creeps in like twilight along the edge of a firelit village. The healers we've followed, the ones who wrap their remedies, not in bandages, but in laughter, were never performers in the way we often imagine. They weren't comedians, and their acts were never acts at all. They weren't trying to be funny. They were trying to be human. It's easy to forget, in a world where medicine is packaged and prescribed, where health comes in bottles and codes, that healing was once a ritual of community, and the laughter that echoed under those moonlit roofs or beneath the mango trees was not something extra or decorative. It was the very breath of the medicine. In one village, long before the borders we know were drawn, there was a healer who refused to speak above a whisper. Her name, barely recorded, was Marcisse. She was old even when the trees were young, they said. And she healed with a song. The song had no words, only breath and a rhythm she tapped softly on her thigh. She would sit beside the sick, hum gently, and begin tapping. Her patients often laughed, not at her, but from within themselves. Something about a rhythm stirred memories, usually ridiculous ones. Children laughing at goats who had eaten prayer flags. A man slipping on a mango and landing in a priest's lap. Memories like those. There was no punchline. There didn't need to be. It was said that Marcisse never cured a fever. She never ended a cough. But her patients left lighter, more rested. Some swore their pains melted with her bead. Some simply said, "I don't know. I just forgot to feel sick." You see, not all healing needs a scalpel or a potion. Some needs forgetting. Not erasing, no, but laying down the burden, if only for a moment. Laughter, then, is not the medicine, but the pause that lets the body remember what healing feels like. And what happens to this kind of healer when silence takes over? That is the quieter tragedy. As colonial medicine swept in, with white coats and record books, healers like Marcisse were gently, then not so gently, pushed aside. They weren't scientists. They couldn't explain the dosage of a song or the measured result of a whisper. What clinical trial can quantify a chuckle shared between old friends? What standard unit of healing can be applied to a story about a goat in a market stall? None, of course. And so their methods faded. Not because they failed, but because they didn't fit. Still, the rhythm remained. Even when the healer was gone, even when the firewood was cold, children remembered the beat. They would tap it in the sand. Grandmothers hummed fragments as they stirred rice. In some quiet corners, the rhythm was mistaken for superstition. In others, it simply became a lullaby. It is easy to overlook this kind of inheritance. Easy to forget that culture does not always survive in books or flags. Sometimes it survives in misremembered melodies, in jokes told at the wrong time, in laughter that makes no sense to anyone but those who share the air. And so, dear listener, ask yourself, what medicine have we lost simply because it cannot be bottled? What healing has slipped between the cracks of science, unmeasured, unmonetized, but no less real? In the next part of our story, we travel not forward, but downward, into the rain-soaked fields of cocoa and cassava, where humor itself was once outlawed. Because even laughter, it turns out, can become a threat. Part 8. When the rain knew the joke. There's an old tale whispered across the cocoa fields of the Gold Coast, long before it became Ghana. It's the kind of story passed not by ink, but by lips, around low fires, told with eyes darting, shoulders hunched, as if the wind itself might be listening. It was said that once, long ago, even the rain knew when it was time to laugh. In the hill village of Atebubu, the rains always came on time, except one year when they didn't. The crops shriveled, the ground cracked like old clay pots, and the people prayed to the old gods and the new alike. They sang songs, offered millet, even built a shrine from broken tools and woven grass. Still, no rain. Then one afternoon, as dust clouded the sky like a faded memory, a boy named Kojo began to laugh. He wasn't laughing at anything, not the dry trees, not the elders' solemn prayers, just laughing. He laughed so hard, he fell from the boulder he'd climbed. He laughed until he cried. And then the rain came. No one could explain it, but the story spread like wild yam root. Kojo, the boy who laughed the rain home. For a while, villagers would try to mimic it. They'd gather in the parched heat, tell ridiculous stories, mimic the shrill cries of hyenas, laugh until their bellies ached, and somehow the rains kept returning. They began calling it the rain's joke, a ceremony not led by priests but by storytellers, a ritual with no chant, only timing. But this laughter was short-lived. As British rule tightened its grip on the Gold Coast, the colonial governors grew suspicious of any gathering not sanctioned by the mission or the magistrate. Drumming was taxed, dancing was policed, and laughter, communal, unpredictable laughter, was discouraged. It stirred unrest, they said. It signaled resistance. One district commissioner even wrote in his report, "The natives gather at dusk under the pretense of merriment. Yet what is merriment, if not a code for sedition?" So the rain's joke was outlawed. Entire villages were fined for unauthorized assemblies. Kojo, now a man, was summoned and warned. His laughter, once celebrated, became something dangerous. His name was erased from the school books. But rain cannot be taxed, and laughter, no matter how quiet, always finds its echo. Kojo left Atebubu, but his rhythm did not. In the mines of Tarkwa, young men began sharing absurd tales before night shifts. They called it Kogo time. In the clinics of Kumasi, nurses would tell riddles while dressing wounds. Even in the churches, laughter crept in, like a misbehaving spirit, during the longest sermons. And yet the colonial administration never quite understood the true danger. It wasn't the sound of laughter that threatened them. It was what it implied, that people, even under rule, still held something no foreign power could write into law. A joy that obeyed no empire. The rains eventually returned, in their own time, and though the ceremony of laughter faded, the memory remained, not in textbooks or museums, but in moments, in the grandmother who chuckled during funerals, in the child who giggled while fetching water, in the old man who told stories with no ending, just to see someone smile. That too is history, and that too is medicine. Part 9. the healer who refused to forget. In the crowded quarter of Jamestown, by the sea where Ghana's shoreline breathes in and out like a sleeping god, lived a woman called Maifia. No one remembered when she had arrived. Some said she had walked from the northern savannas with a bundle of herbs and a memory full of songs. Others claimed she was born in Accra, in a hut that no longer stood, to a mother who laughed herself into labor. What was certain, however, was this. Maifia never forgot how to heal with laughter. She kept no written records. Her clinic was no more than a sun-washed veranda lined with mats and jugs of red earth water. But people came, not just for her teas or salves or fermented pawpaw. They came to be remembered, because Maifia remembered everything that was forbidden to remember. She remembered the songs outlawed by the mission schools. She remembered the laughter banned from court steps. She remembered the jokes that used to summon rain. Each morning she would open her arms and say, "Tell me what hurt you, but let's not forget what made you laugh." Then she would tell a story, sometimes absurd, sometimes tender, always unexpected. To a woman weeping from miscarriage, Maifia would whisper, "Did I ever tell you about the chicken who laid an egg so big it became a watermelon?" To a boy too frightened to speak after being beaten by a teacher, she'd chuckle. Once there was a yam who didn't know it was a yam, so it tried to become a goat and failed terribly. And to a widower hollowed by grief, she'd say gently, "My husband once left the house in 2 left shoes. He insisted the gods had changed the streets instead of his feet." People laughed. Through tears, they laughed. And after laughter came something else. Not joy exactly, but a soft kind of balance, like standing after being dizzy. Maifia understood what generations before her had learned. That pain pushes out air from the lungs, but laughter invites it back in. But even her laughter drew suspicion. In the late 1950s, when Ghana approached independence, political tension crackled like dry grass. Activists whispered about sabotage. Colonial police listened for sedition. And laughter, particularly public laughter, was once again treated with distrust. It was too close to defiance, too unpredictable. One day, a young inspector came to her veranda. He watched as she entertained a line of children, acting out the tale of a blind antelope who challenged a lion to a game of hide and seek. The children shrieked with laughter. Parents chuckled from behind water pots. Even the breeze seemed to hesitate, curious. The inspector stepped forward. "Are you educating the children with these tales?" he asked. Maifia looked up, her eyes worn and bright. "No," she said. "I am letting them forget, just long enough to breathe again." He did not know how to respond. She continued, "Education tells them how the world should be, but laughter tells them how to survive the world that is." He wrote nothing in his report that day. Perhaps he understood. Or perhaps he was afraid that if he listened too long, he might start laughing too. Maifia lived through the flags rising and the anthems changing. She saw roads paved and languages lost. But until her final breath, she laughed. On her last day, a storm broke over Jamestown. The gutters overflowed. A bolt of lightning split the baobab tree. People came to her veranda only to find her mat empty, her herbs packed away. But under a stone near the door, someone found a piece of cloth with a single sentence sewn into it. If they ever forget how to laugh, remind them I never did. Part 10. The echo that doesn't fade. By the time the century turned and clocks glowed blue in the hands of machines, laughter had changed. It was no longer just heard. It was recorded, trimmed, shared, echoed in headphones. Comedy had become commodity, but the kind of laughter the old healers used, the one that stitched spirit to body, no longer walked the streets. Yet in certain places, quiet, unnoticed corners of West Africa, it hadn't vanished. In a dim corner of a hospital in Bamako, a young nurse named Yaya began to hum as he wrapped a patient's bandaged leg. It wasn't a song he'd learned in school. It came from his grandmother, who used to say, "Never trust a medicine that can't dance." He started telling short tales to his patients, ones with turtles who forgot where they buried their dreams, ones with frogs who mistook thunder for applause. The patients smiled, some giggled. One old woman with failing kidneys whispered, "You're like the healers from before, the ones who could trick pain into letting go." Yaya didn't reply, but that night he wrote down his story in a small notebook. On the first page he scribbled, "Laughter can be stored, so let me store it." In Senegal, at the edge of the Atlantic, a group of midwives revived an old tradition during night births, telling absurd riddles between contractions. The expectant mothers, gripping sheets and howling through pain, found themselves snorting through tears. What grows when you walk away from it, but dies if you stare too long? No answer. Your fear, one midwife said. And they laughed and cried and birthed life into a world that too often forgot joy. In a Lagos school, a literature teacher began sneaking in forbidden folk tales between Shakespeare and Chimamanda. One story involved a spirit who only understood laughter and refused to haunt those who giggled. The students didn't just memorize, they felt. And in the forested hills of Togo, someone found a cave marked by a faint painting. 3 people, drawn with ochre, laughing. No spears, no fire, just mouths wide open. The archaeologists debated its age, but one whispered, "It may be older than language." They were all part of the echo. It's not loud, not viral. It does not trend. But it doesn't fade either, because somewhere, always, someone remembers that laughter once cured swelling in the soul, that joy once lowered fevers, that a chuckle, freely given, could drive out shame better than any pill, and that the greatest healers didn't only touch the body, but tickled the unseen places where grief tried to hide. So if you find yourself tonight, alone, heavy, sleepless, close your eyes, listen carefully, beyond the city noise, beyond the hum of machines. There faintly, like breath on the edge of time, someone is telling a joke to the stars, and the stars are laughing back. And that too is medicine. The end. If you're still awake, that's okay. You've just wandered through memories that were never yours, but now gently belong to your heart. From the bright cloths of the healers to the hush between their chuckles, you've listened to a world where medicine was laughter and silence was never empty. somewhere in the night a mango falls, and in a forgotten village, someone still remembers a joke their grandfather never finished telling. Sleep now, and let the echoes of that kindness rest beside you. Tomorrow will come, but tonight, let your breath slow down. Let your thoughts soften. And if you smile, even in your sleep, you're only answering a healer's whisper from long, long ago. Good night, dear listener. Sleepthrum will be here, waiting gently beneath the stars.